If you've been paying attention to college football over the last few years, you have definitely heard the name Sam Hartman. Whether it was his school record-breaking career at Wake Forest, or his 1 year as the starter at Notre Dame, Sam Hartman is a guy that pretty much everyone knows about. What's crazy though, is he has been around for a long time, and has been through a lot. Not only was he the backup to Will Grier in high school, but he also tragically lost someone super close to him, helped have one of the best seasons in Wake Forest history, and had an up and down year at Notre Dame. Despite statistically being near the top in multiple areas in college football, Sam Hartman went undrafted in the 2024 NFL Draft. How could a guy with such big numbers, so much experience, and so much hype not get selected? Well, in today's video, we're going to talk about Sam Hartman. This will be a typical video where I go through the rise and fall of a player, and we're going to talk about who this guy is, his crazy long career, and why he ultimately went undrafted. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I could cover next. Now let's get started and talk about Sam Hartman. In order to understand how Hartman got to this point, we first need to go back in time. He ended up coming up in the North Carolina football area, and as a sophomore, he led his team to a high school team state championship. He was also named a first-team All-State selection and threw for 2,600 yards with 24 touchdowns and 4 picks. His coach, Chad Grier, said, quote, "I just want him to continue to embrace the process and the progress." Yeah, so Chad Grier was the coach at the time, and at one point, Hartman was the backup to Will Grier, who was a 5-star recruit who played at both Florida and West Virginia. That's how long ago Sam Hartman was playing high school football, and now he's just entering the NFL as a rookie. To me, it's crazy. At one point, Hartman was compared to Drew Brees, and he would continue to get better and better throughout his time at Davidson Day High School. He had a couple of notable moments, including one game in a Friday night in Asheville. In that game, he threw for 493 yards against Irwin High, and this is when everybody knew that Hartman had superstar potential. Except though, what makes this even crazier is that 3 weeks before, doctors were removing a baseball-sized growth from his neck. This was the result of a bacteria infection, and he dropped from 173 pounds to 149 pounds in just 2 weeks. Chad Grier said, quote, "I've never seen or heard anything like this. If you had seen him when he lost all the weight, you would not recognize him. I'm telling you, he did not look good." As it turns out, Hartman had a small tear in his thyroid gland, and this allowed bacteria to go into his shoulder. What started as mild pain in his shoulder ended up growing a lot worse, and the pain would travel from his shoulder to his neck. His throat became so sore that he couldn't even eat, and he was already having trouble sleeping to begin with. But Hartman was a determined guy. Chad Grier said, quote, "He grew an inch in the offseason to 6'1", and then he put on muscle. He looked great, and then in a matter of weeks it was all gone. But when he got out of the hospital, he was so determined to play against Asheville, I wasn't going to be the one to tell him that he wasn't going to play. So he ended up playing. While he was in the hospital, there were some doubts about him returning to the team, but one day, he walked through the halls and saw all the children that were being treated for cancer. Those guys were being robbed of their hair and potentially their life. He said, quote, "Seeing the chemo room and all the kids in there, they have no hair and they're walking around having fun. I looked at my situation and I said I'm blessed and luckier than they are, and they're happier than me. That immediately switched my mindset." While that was all difficult for him, it would not be the only difficult moment for Hartman. Sadly, they had tragedy. They had adopted an older brother by the name of Dimitri Allison, and at the age of 21, he decided to take his own life. This would happen on November 11th of 2015, just 2 days before Davidson Day was supposed to play in the state championship. Allison was a football player at Elon, and he was struggling behind the scenes. This is really unfortunate. 2 days after his death, Sam switched his jersey number to 10, and then led Davidson Day to a 31-14 win to claim a state championship. As a junior in 2016, Hartman became mainstream as he finished with 3,700 yards and 45 touchdowns. He also only had 6 interceptions and a couple of big performances, as in one game he had 493 yards, and then another one he had 568 yards and 7 touchdowns. Hartman was definitely a star, but where was he going to go? Well, he said he found the perfect fit pretty much right away, and there was no use in waiting around. He was determined, and he chose to commit to Wake Forest early on, as they were one of his first offers. Hartman said, quote, "I'm 100% to Wake. I loved Wake right away, and I wanted to get solid football and a great education. There's no other place out there like Wake that can provide great football and great education, and it's close." He apparently chose Wake over both Elon and Charlotte, and I guess as you could tell, he wasn't exactly the biggest name in the world, despite big numbers. He was extremely underrated for sure. Chad Greer said, quote, "He didn't make this commitment lightly. He wouldn't have made that decision if he wasn't sure he was a good fit at Wake, and I think they've seen the same thing that other coaching staffs are seeing. I had a coach from Penn State call me a week ago and told me he's better than 100 other 2018 quarterbacks. He said that Sam was the best that he's seen." While his time at Davidson Day was great, he decided to go over to Oceanside High School for one last year. He ended up throwing for 3,000 yards and 29 touchdowns, with 9 more scores on the ground. Why did he leave? Well, he was going to be on the show QB1 Beyond the Lights. He said, quote, "QB1 perfectly depicts the low level of competition at Oceanside. The main reason I transferred down there was to focus on my leadership skills and to try to take over a locker room of guys I've never met. That's something I wanted to do here at Wake, and I learned a lot from that experience." What's crazy is Sam Hartman only had 3 scholarship offers coming out of high school, despite putting up monster stats. He was a high school All-American and dominated each and every year and commanded each and every room. Despite all that, he was only considered a 3-star recruit, the number 32 pro-style quarterback, and the 767th best player in the class of 2018. So, how would Sam Hartman do over at Wake Forest? When Sam Hartman would arrive at Wake Forest, he was tagged as the team's starting quarterback. Their first game would come against Tulane, and he apparently beat out Jamie Newman. Newman would have a quad injury on August 18th and would miss some practice because of that. After that, the job belonged to Hartman, and he would have been 3rd string, but their main starting quarterback, Kendall Hinton, was suspended 3 games. Just like he had always done, Hartman played terrific in the first 3 games of the year. He led all freshmen in the country for yards of offense, and he led them to a 4-4 record before he would suffer a brutal injury against Syracuse. This would hold him out for the remainder of the season, and Hartman in 2018 threw for 1,900 yards with 16 touchdowns and 8 picks. In 2019, he would battle it out with Jamie Newman for the starting spot, but would end up losing the job. Hartman would appear in 4 games, throwing for 830 yards and 4 touchdowns while keeping his redshirt status. As Jamie Newman decided to go off to Georgia and then quit on the team, Sam Hartman gladly took over the starting nod in 2020. He became the team captain and would play in all 9 games. He threw for 2,200 yards with 13 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. Going into 2021, Hartman was starting to get a considerable amount of hype. He'd end up building upon his past 3 years as he led Wake Forest to an 8-0 start. A couple of these games were extremely thrilling as they barely beat Louisville and then beat Syracuse in an overtime game. It all climaxed with a 45-7 blowout over Duke, and now Wake Forest was 8-0 and Hartman was on top of the college football world. Sadly though, the next game would prove to be difficult. In a duel with Sam Howell, Hartman would throw for 400 yards and 5 touchdowns and also ran for 2 more. In total, he had 7 scores, but they lost 58-55 in a thriller against the Tar Heels. After that, he'd lead them to a bounce-back win with 4 touchdowns against number 16 NC State, before having an awful performance against Clemson. He finished the regular season with a win over Boston College, and Wake Forest would get to the ACC championship game. In a battle with Kenny Pickett, he would have 3 touchdowns, but he had 4 costly interceptions as number 15 Pitt blew them out 45-21. In total, he set multiple Wake Forest single-season records, including 39 touchdown passes and 4,200 yards. This was a huge deal for him, and then going into 2022, he was seen as a top 5 quarterback in the country. Sadly though, things would be really difficult for him as he would develop a blood clot under his collarbone, and many thought this could hold him out for a lot of time. He ended up having surgery, and a rib was actually removed from his body to alleviate pressure. What's really funny is he actually wore the thing in a necklace around his neck. I remember that going viral. He would miss their season opener against VMI, but would return for their second game against Vanderbilt. From there, Hartman would have a good year, as he threw 7 touchdowns in his first 2 games against Liberty and Vanderbilt, and then had 6 touchdowns in a double overtime loss to Clemson. After that, he'd helped them beat number 23 Florida State, and then with wins over Army and Boston College, Wake was off to a 5-1 start. Sadly, some losing would start to happen as he struggled with turnovers against Louisville, NC State, and North Carolina, and they lost all 3 of those games. They did have a win against Syracuse, but they would lose their final game against Duke, and Hartman kind of had an underwhelming end of the year. They'd end up going to the Gasparilla Bowl, where they would play against Mizzou, my team, and Hartman would throw 3 touchdowns. They would win that game, and in total, he threw for 3,700 yards with 38 touchdowns and 12 picks. Normally, a guy like Sam Hartman would be done, but with the extra year of eligibility in 2020, he could use it to his advantage. While at Wake Forest, he became the ACC's all-time leader in touchdown passes and became college football's active leader in career passing yards. He had 110 touchdowns and nearly 13,000 yards. He would decide to enter the 2023 transfer portal, and plenty of schools wanted his talents. Ultimately, he would decide to go up to South Bend, Indiana, and would really vibe with Marcus Freeman and the coaching staff there. He was trying to set himself up for a great season at a higher level and help himself get over to the NFL. Sadly, honestly, Hartman was pretty underwhelming in 2023 though. While he did get off to a hot start, it was only temporary. He had 4 touchdowns against Navy, 3 against Tennessee State, 4 against NC State, and 4 against Central Michigan, but no one really cared about those games. Everyone was wondering how he would perform against Ohio State. In one of the biggest non-con games of the year, Sam Hartman disappeared. He ended up throwing for 175 yards with 1 touchdown and no interceptions. I was personally at this game and it was pretty thrilling, and no offense, but Sam Hartman was made of glass. I think there were 2 or 3 times where he could have gotten a first down on 4th down, but he just didn't want to take a hit. I thought Sam Hartman played extremely soft and looked honestly scared. Ultimately, Ohio State would score a last-second touchdown, and this was a big blow to Notre Dame's playoff hopes. After that, Hartman would completely disappear against number 17 Duke, as despite not throwing a touchdown, they would end up beating the Blue Devils 21-14. After that, he would throw 3 interceptions and a loss to the Cinderella Louisville Cardinals, and many were starting to turn on Hartman. In 3 games against ranked teams, he had pretty much completely disappeared, but he would bounce back. In a home victory over number 10 USC, Hartman would throw for 2 touchdowns in that one, and the crowd was back on his side. Sadly, he didn't help himself, as the following week against Pitt, he had 2 interceptions without a touchdown in that one, but they won 58-7. Now, Hartman would play in his 5th big-time game in 6 weeks, as they would go on the road to Clemson. For a guy who should have 6 years of starting experience, he really didn't play well. He had 146 yards without a passing touchdown and 2 interceptions. Besides 1 rushing score, Hartman was pretty much a non-factor, and Notre Dame lost 31-23 to Clemson. After that, in a return game against Wake, he threw for 4 scores in that one, and then would finish his Notre Dame career with 2 touchdowns and 1 over Stanford. In total, he threw for 2,600 yards with 24 touchdowns and 8 picks. No offense, but in the 5 biggest games of the year, he really didn't do a whole lot. He struggled with turnovers, they only won 2 of those games, and Hartman was brought in to win big and put up big numbers. It really just didn't happen, and in my eyes, the season was underwhelming for Hartman. It kind of showed that maybe he was overrated coming out of Wake, but still, he was a good quarterback and a good guy, and was especially a great leader. I'm sure if he had another year of eligibility, he would have used it, but he decided to declare for the 2024 NFL Draft, where he was listed as a fringe draft pick. Many saw him more as an undrafted free agent, and a quarterback that could maybe make the roster as a career backup. To mainstream NFL and football fans, pretty much everyone knew him for his hair, but that was not going to get him drafted. As the draft went on, his name was not called, and he was eventually picked up by the Washington Commanders. He'll try to fight to be that 3rd quarterback on the roster, but why did Sam Hartman go undrafted? Well, I have 3 reasons. 1, his age. While Hartman did play 6 years of college football and that benefited him, that doesn't help. He's already a pretty old guy, and not many teams are wanting to take a chance on a player that old who doesn't have significant upside. That leads me to point number 2. While he does have some decent qualities, he wasn't exactly great in any area. He didn't have a super arm, he wasn't super mobile, he wasn't super dominant in college, and seemingly he was just average or above average in every category. He was the definition of a good college quarterback who didn't exactly excel in any area in terms of making it to the next level. That also brings me to my 3rd point, and that is just a stigma. Everyone knew Sam Hartman was great at Wake Forest, but how would he do against the better teams at a bigger school on a bigger stage? Unfortunately, Sam Hartman did not live up to the hype. While his numbers were not bad, he just didn't pass the eye test. He really didn't beat any big teams, his numbers went down, and he underwhelmed compared to all the hype and how good he should have been. For those 3 reasons, that's why I believe Sam Hartman was undrafted, as it was his age, the eye test, and just him being average in every category. For example, a guy like Devin Leary was drafted just based on his arm, as Hartman was better than him in every area, but Leary had 1 trait that could at least be developed. The same could be said for a guy like Joe Milton or Michael Pratt. Hartman ended up going undrafted, but he had a pretty crazy career. It seems like he's been in college football for a long time now, and it's sad to see the guy go, and I wish him the best of luck with the Commanders. But what do you guys think? If you're a fan of Sam Hartman, why do you think he went undrafted? If you're a Notre Dame fan, what are your thoughts on him and his season in Notre Dame and his 1 year in South Bend? And what other prospect or player should I take a look at next? Be sure to let me know down below. Leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.